We're now going to be passing it on to Ida, Aaron, and Michael to speak about the research option.
Ida, are you there?
I was going to say, I think Ida was going to start.
Yes, I'm here. I didn't understand that. Hello, my name is Ida Bahramian, and I'm teaching a research project. I wanted just to present you what is this course and what is, okay, my second language is French, and the English is my third language. I apologize if I have some error. This course, it's about the form and how we can do a research project, because whenever you do your research, after that, eventually for the bachelor's student, you should participate in a research day. Normally, you have to present your research in the form of poster or maybe writing, I think, an abstract. And in this course, I try to prepare you to writing or for doing your research. And I decided to teach this course step by step. It means that whenever we are hearing about research and whenever we are reading some articles, it could be really weird for us, and maybe we cannot understand how we have to write it or do our research. And the field is physical activity, health and leisure, and in this field. And we want to apply our knowledge for the scientific process in various research tasks. First of all, how I start my course. We start with a review of various steps in our research project. And after that, we define 3 types of research approach: quantitative, qualitative, and mixed method design, and how we have to know which kind of research we are doing, which approach we have, because we have to know. And after, as we need always for research, we have to do our literature review. And we start to learn how we have to read the articles or some parts of the book who are really related to our study, and how we have to choose it, and how we can do our resume. It means that in the form of some tables, I ask the student to write down some important part of their research, their literature, and how to find their resource that they used. And after each part, students should submit the whatever we are talking about. After that, they should submit their table using at least 5 resources. And after that, whenever they are familiar to the process of the literature review, I ask them, we have a course about how to write the introduction and the research problem. After this course, they should submit the introduction and the research problem. And when they submit their introduction and they are familiar with introduction and how to use different resources, I teach the purpose statement and research questions or hypotheses, depends on the type of the research. And whenever we are talking, and I give them some formulas, how we have to write, we have to use the verbs and words, they should submit their purpose statement and research question and hypothesis. Just after that, they have to start because they don't have lots of time. I ask them that you should be really conscious that you started your data collections because you don't have enough time for data analysis. And as each student's project is different from others, I ask them to have some meetings in private with me to be sure that whatever they do is good. After that, they have to work on their abstract because as I told them that eventually even for their scholarships or to participate in some conferences or whenever they want to present their project, they should be able to write down their abstract. So after that, they have to write down their abstract and submit it. And after that, they have time to work on the poster if they want really to present the project in the form of poster, and they will have a course about the parts that they need in the posters. And so step by step in this course, they will learn how we can really do our research and how we can go on. It's finished. Do you have any question?
Thanks, Glenn. Maybe Aaron and I can kind of jump in a little bit, and maybe we'll save questions for the end, if that's okay. Does that maybe make sense? Alex, you're still leading this. I'm just jumping in. Is that okay if we go that way? Sure. Okay. Thanks. Yeah. So it's great to hear. So having the person who's actually doing the course this year, it's really important to hear the various steps in terms of what you're going to experience. I think maybe it's important to think about this. The general purpose of doing this type of course, again, that you have a decision to make whether you're going to do the internship or do the research project, and there's great strengths to both. There's not weaknesses; they're both just strengths. So it's awesome. And so I think when you're thinking about the fourth year research project, a lot of times I think people might be thinking it's really just to do academic research or to think about graduate school. There's still lots of really important job applications for this as well. So if you're perhaps working for the government and there's lots of research tasks, lots of positions that are kind of research based, that you would be able to demonstrate that you have certain skills working in different disciplines, whether it's more quantitative or more qualitative. So it's really important. I also wanted to really emphasize that you're going to see some presentations after this that are from some of our star professors. But in fact, it's a very small glimpse of the excellent research that goes on in our school. And our school, in fact, is made up of, it's very unique, I think, compared to a lot of different fields, because we have such a range from the biophysical sciences to social sciences and even humanities. And so we have expertise in quite a range of research. And so what you as a student should be thinking about, if you're interested a little bit in research, again, still encourage you to kind of sign up with the internship and get on Daniel's list, but keep this in the back of your mind, because what you do need is a professor to work with. So what this research will involve, and it's not just simply your own research, you have to find a professor who will work with you as a supervisor, and which makes up pretty well, I guess 70 or 80% of your time is actually working with that professor. And there has to be a willingness by the professor to actually be able to work with you. So you should be really thinking about this early. And again, I don't know if there's first and second year students on the call still, but finding opportunities to work as volunteering, to either working for a professor in a lab or doing some small assignments with the professor. Reach out to them as early as you can in your human kinetics undergrad degree, because you'll need to have those connections in order to for a professor to be able to take you on. There's an issue of capacity. So some professors are limited in the sense that we only have so much room to take on students. Some labs have capacity. So It's not that they might not be interested in working with you, they might be just simply full. So it's really important, if you're interested in this avenue, to find a professor that you can work with, and then ultimately find out, are there opportunities to do a fourth year project? And I'll talk very briefly, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Cressman, because I'm representing more on the social sciences in our school. And even within that, there's a huge range of types of field research or research that you could be involved in. So primarily the work I do, I work up in northern Indigenous communities, and it's very expensive. So it's quite rare that I'm able to take students into the field with me. I have done that before on field work, but it's expensive. I obviously have to fly people up and accommodate them, and it's complicated. So those opportunities are a bit more rare, but there's other projects where I have some students doing some data collection and some analysis on a hockey related project that I'm working with Dr. Hoshizaki. And so it's a totally different type of experience. So each professor, it depends on the research that they're doing, and it will really influence the type of project and what your expectations are, and what your project might look like. So some of them are even more ready-made. So it's like, we have a very specific project. I need you to run analysis on head trauma and head contact events in minor ice hockey. Some of them might be more open to, for example, you might want to look at what are the possibilities of examining a question. One of the fourth year projects I did in a different field was someone was trying to understand impacts of COVID on exercise adherence. And it wasn't really my expertise, but I'd kind of known the student as an undergrad. And I said, well, I'll try to do my best to help supervise. But the student really led that research. It was almost entirely by herself. In fact, I learned more from it than anything. And so this student really was kind of the boss of that project, and I was more kind of there to kind of guide her along some of the processes in terms of how to do research, how to recruit participants, etc. So again, I'll kind of stop there, because again, there might be just more questions that I can field, but Dr. Cressman comes from the biophysical science side of things, and it's very, very different than would be working with me and the people that I know in the social sciences. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Cressman.
All right, thank you. I think we should just go back to the one point that Dr. Robidoux indicated, and that's about capacity. And so I would really encourage you over the next few weeks, if you're in your third year and thinking about a project, to start approaching professors. Often we only have about 20 to 25 students doing a fourth year project. Professors maybe take one, maybe a maximum of 2 students. And so a number of professors who take students on also have undergrad students in their lab or research program already as UROP students, summer studentships. So those are ways to get involved in the research early, and many of those continue on to do a fourth year project. In terms of ways to kind of connect with a professor or think about an area, one thing would be to think about which courses you really enjoy. If you're then comfortable approaching that professor who's taught that course, and if they don't have space, asking them if they have ideas on who else maybe is in a similar field, and you could then look to talk to them. If you're in courses where you connect with TAs, that's also a good way to begin to know about the research going on. Our graduate students who are TAs are all doing research, so they have the supervisor themselves. And so they'll be able to give you an idea of maybe some of that research that's going on in the lab or in some kind of research setting. And so while I do come from the physical sciences, and so that in our school is motor control and learning, biomechanics, and exercise physiology, I actually wouldn't say it's too much different than social sciences, in that there is kind of a wide range of what students do for their fourth year project. So I've had students who say have maybe done a UROP with me, who then look to design their own fourth year project. They're kind of on the ball early enough. Ethics needs to be considered as well in a project, but actually we'll have time to kind of design a small project that they would like to do. Other students come in and I pair them with a graduate student. So we find an area that they're interested in and a current project going on in the lab. The goal always being to get undergrad students the opportunity to collect and work with some data. We want to give you hands-on experience. And so that's really what you should be making sure you're going to have as you look at opportunities in this fourth year project. So again, those opportunities of what the question is and maybe what approach you would have may differ and will differ across all disciplines, but there should be the same opportunities involved. It's a great learning experience. We don't really give you that in other courses. And as Ida, that was great to hear that you're taking students kind of from the beginning of the research step all the way through the end. Most of your mark comes from the professor you're working with. Like they will evaluate that research paper you do, how you work in a research setting as well. And so you really get that chance to build that rapport with the professor you're working with and potentially fellow graduate students as well, which is important. That was very brief and probably quick. I'm not sure if there's questions.
Just before Lucas has a question, but I just put the link to the form. So there's a form to fill in once you find a project with you find a prof. So you have to fill in a 2-page form, sign it, the professor signs it as well, and then you have to send it to me, and I have to approve. So that can give you an idea as well what you need to as information. So I put it in the chat. There's a question by Lucas.
Hi, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
This is a question more for Dr. Cressman, I guess. What would it look like, what would the process look like for a student like myself in the HK or the BHK program? If they're trying to venture into a more physical science related research topic, in my case, it would be specifically more on the motor control and learning side of things. What would that look like?
It would look the same as students in the BSc, at least students that I've taken. So for our motor control and learning, all students in our program take that second year course. We appreciate that you come in with an understanding. You might not have taken a third year course. Sometimes I do suggest to students coming into my lab that they take a third year course. One I usually teach, the neural control and movement. But it's definitely open. I know myself, Dr. Carlson and Dr. Yves Lajoie would be the other ones who are in motor control and learning, and we've all taken BHK. Motor control and learning is kind of I would say, a bridge between the physical sciences and the social sciences. So I can't say for necessarily biomechanics or exercise physiology. That said, all students at the undergrad level do take introductions to those courses. And so there is room, and if there is a willingness to learn, for sure.
All right, thank you all for presenting. Next on the schedule, we're a bit ahead of schedule. It's currently 6:27. We have Dr. Michael Lisio presenting at 6:45. Alex, am I going to be waiting for him to begin?
I don't think Michael, Dr. Lisio is already here, but I think we should still talk a little more about research project. I'm sure there's plenty of other things we could add just to take advantage of the time we have. I wanted maybe to add as well the fact that at the end of the year, because you have the fall and winter semester with working on your projects, and at the very end you have a conference, and it's a student conference. And I wanted to express that the quality of this conference is really, really interesting. We have, it's a research day, we call it, and everybody presents. And we try to invite the dean every year as well, professors, because the quality usually is really good, and it gives you an amazing experience of presenting at a conference, right? With all the setting. You could be doing presenting a poster. There's a section for posters, and people walk around, you discuss, you research. Or you could be presenting orally in an auditorium with your PowerPoint, and it's very, so like a real conference setting, and gives you a really good conference experience. but at the same time, it's usually very good quality. And really the experience you're getting from this project is great. It's great because you get to know all the stages of research. You work on finding a question, depending what project you're working with, right? But it's hands-on with different process, different project stage of the research project, which is great experiences. And the conference day is a really, really nice experience and event for the students.
Alex, maybe if I just jump in too, and so many of the students who do the fourth year project, we've seen them actually go on to other conferences. So, I mean, we have a Canadian Motor Control Conference. A number of fourth year students have presented at that. There's similar associations for biomechanics, exercise physiology, and across the social sciences. And there are incidences of students actually publishing their work as well. And so it's not this research that you're doing. Most of the faculty, as Michael indicated, are kind of these star researchers that you'll hear from. I mean, they are doing research that's looking to be output into the kind of associations and groups, their scientific groups. And so students do have the chance to then contribute to that output as well.
Yeah, just to add to that, if anyone is interested in going to graduate school, you know, it's super competitive now in terms of scholarships. And one of the things that really adds to your chance, in addition to your academic standing, is your ability to present at conferences and get publications. And so a lot of us, that's kind of an end, you know, kind of, we want to get you through the fourth year project, but as a starting point, I think a lot of us do think about looking at a publication for sure. There's many examples of fourth year students publishing their work, and it gets you a leg up on your ability to get scholarships in graduate school. So that's a really important point. And just to also say, we've been lucky enough, like as Dr. Ariano has mentioned, the quality of the conference is really outstanding. Like it makes us really proud as professors and as a school to see such amazing research being presented, the knowledge that our students have, and whether it's the oral presentations, which is, I think there's usually 10, like there's kind of a selection process. So there's about 10 students that can do oral presentations, and then the rest do posters. But we all walk around, or at least when it's in person, we all get to walk around, interact with the students, and see incredible, it's just a incredible learning experience and the knowledge that our students have. And so it is a really, it's a wonderful day, but it's something like we're really just proud of all the work that's being done over the course of the year.
Ida, I think there's something maybe you wanted to add. You had your hand raised, or maybe we mentioned.
I wanted to ask you if is it possible to explain more about Research Day, because for me too, there are some questions.
Yeah, so for sure we can talk about it, but so Ida will be organizing it the day, right? So we can discuss that. It's going to be in April. We have to find a date. Usually it's between the end of the semester, the end of the courses, and the beginning of exams. So there's like sometimes 1 or 2 days. So we try to find that date. Usually that's the day we find for a research project. And then I can, we have to book a room. We have to do invitations, write a program. So we can talk about it, but yeah.
Something to do, Alex, is the get Lana. This is another opportunity for alumni to bring alumni in. I don't know if we've typically done that, but send the invitations to, that would be a good thing that we're doing for the alumni engagement.
Absolutely. We also have a scholarship for biomechanics students. So usually during Research Day, we listen to the presentations. We have somebody from biomechanics, and that will be the judge. and all the biomechanics presentation or posters are going to be evaluated, and the student, the best thesis is going to win $1,000 scholarship. It's the Gord Robinson Scholarship Prize for biomechanics. So usually that's a surprise. The students don't even know about it, and they're all of a sudden they get this scholarship. So we walk around and we evaluate this is only for those who choose to do biomechanics. Another thing I could add as well is that the fact that there are opportunities to practice writing in the undergrad, but less, right? And I think it's such a good skill to develop, the writing skills in general. Whichever domain group it is, but you're writing a paper, an academic paper with academic style of writing. And this is a skill that is going to follow you anywhere, in any job. Is very, very important for many jobs right now to have a good basis on expressing yourselves in written and being able to find sources, put the paper like professional with your ideas clear. I think it's a really, really good skill to be developing on your undergraduate.
There was a question in the chat about students interested in doing both, or are they interested in both?
It does happen that students ask us if they can do both. And I think it's possible. It is. So you need one of the two. You need internship or research project, but you could do both and you would have 12 credits, right? One of them would count as your optional credits. It will count as your APA optional. So it's possible.
I think that, sorry, Daniel, you go.
Well, I was just going to add, the experiences are different. They're both practical work experience, like Michael was saying. Anything in a research side, I can't replicate on the internship side. So you'll be working with specialized equipment if you choose a research project as an example, and I can't replicate that with any of our partners. So they're both practical experiences. I would recommend speaking with the professors that you're interested in working with. Schedule a meeting with me over the summer so that we can talk about potential internship opportunities. And then you can make a more informed decision on if you feel like the schedule is realistic, or if you feel like there's an option that you're more interested in.
Good.
Well, we're killing some dead air. I wanted to extend my thanks to Alexandra and the HKSA for all the work for putting this this day together. This whole capstone thing. It's great, and it's such a great way for us to start interacting with our students and for students to kind of get a sense of what professors are doing in terms of the research. And so thanks, Alex and Kevin and Bryce, and I'm sure you're all involved, but also just in terms specific to the fourth year project and the research internship or the internship. I've got to know Daniel over the past couple of years as director, and it's a ton of work. And so we're really lucky to have Daniel with us doing everything that's involved in terms of making sure not just that our partnerships are there, but again, that the experiences are quality enough to actually be acceptable for our school and for our program. And so a little shout out to Daniel as well. So yeah.
And thank you, Aida, for being here as well. It's your first year teaching it, so.
Thank you so much, and thank you to invite me here to share with you my experience, and it's a pleasure to work with you. Thank you.
Excellent. Great. So we have a little 5 minutes. I don't know if you want to stretch, take a little break.
Yeah, we'll take a little break here. Just prior to the break, I do want to let everyone know that's in the call right now. We are doing a little meet and greet at Father and Sons following the event. Anywhere from around 8:50 to 9 following the presentations, we'll begin. We'll be there for an hour or two. So if you want to swing by, feel free. So we'll take a 4 or 5 minute break now before Dr. Delisio takes over with his presentation.
Okay, I go.
Perfect.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
See you soon.
Bye. See you. Bye.
Je sais pas, Daniel, si tu restes. Si tu restes pas.
Je réponds à des questions
Good.
dans le chat.
Excellent.
Alex, I actually have one question, if you happen to be there right now.
Sure. I had a question in the chat room that I was reading.
Yeah. One of the students actually also asked me too. So regarding I guess the course sequence, there's like little other rules such as like mandatory optionals or limits to how many courses you can take of a certain kind. With the first year limit for courses, one of the students was asking if they've taken 48 credits in first year, so that's 16 first year courses. If they take a 17, will they be denied enrollment, or will it just not count for credit when they enroll? If that makes any sense.
So what's the program the student is in? That's what I think that's what I'm reading here from.
Yeah, I believe it's the regular BSCHK, I think.
BHK?
Yeah, BSCHK.
BSc. Okay. Regular, so it means that you have 30 credits of elective. So if your electives are 1000 level, I think it should be okay as an elective. I think it's any course, but it's a good question. I never had that question. If you can go to 1000 level, I'm not sure why you would choose those courses, because they're really normally they're more basic. You would want to progress to a 3000, 4000 logically. So I'm not sure what is the interest in taking more 1000 level courses.
I don't think it was the interest of taking more. It was the situation of they've taken, like, for instance, when you apply to certain schools, they have your complete basic prereqs that are first year and second year level. So if the student has to take those prereqs to apply, and they don't count for credits here at Ottawa, but they're going to count as a prerequisite when they apply to a grad school. That's going to cause a problem for their graduation process, but not necessarily for the application process, if that makes any sense.
If it's credits that would come from before, things like that, this will have to be analyzed by academic advisor. Yeah, for sure. Because it gets tricky sometimes when it comes from what can be given as equivalences here. If that the question, if I understand well the question, but definitely I would go and talk to an academic advisor for this. Yeah.
Question also.
Ariane.
Oui. Ben, c'était plus une question pour Daniel, en fait. Je suis juste en train d'essayer de remplir le formulaire pour s'abonner à la liste de courriel. Mais quand ça nous demande de sélectionner nos domaines d'intérêt de stage, ça nous donne juste l'option d'en choisir un.
Ok, je vais aller regarder ça.
Juste parce que je mettrais, mettons, kinésiologie et réhabilitation.
Ouais, tu peux spécifier, donne-moi ton premier choix. Puis, tu peux spécifier dans les notes à la toute fin, s'il y en a d'autres, mais c'est juste pour me donner une idée, on va en parler plus en détail. Là. Tu ne réserves pas rien juste avec ça. Là.
OK. Puis là, pour la question après, comme les organisations d'intérêt? Comme si on n'a pas vraiment l'idée, on peut juste le laisser vide?
Ben, tu peux juste écrire rien, là. Je pense que tu as besoin d'écrire quelque chose, mais
Ouais, ben c'est ça.
quand
Je
même.
vais spécifier l'autre question d'avant dans cette boîte-là. Fait que... OK, parfait, merci.
Daniel, some students are just asking to put the link in the chat for the form, if that's possible.
I'll do that.
And I guess briefly for one more summer question related to the internship, if you're able to take it right now.
Yep.
So you mentioned how from May to August, like mid-August, it would run for the program. You also said during the school year, you have to complete a certain amount of hours per week, so like 7 weeks. In the summer, is there a specific requirement in those details? Or like, for instance, could you do 4 weeks? And then, for instance, if 1 week you're off and then you're coming back for the other 4 weeks after that. So you're only missing like 1 week of a gap in the internship in the summer.
Yeah, so those parameters are there. Like I respect the spirit of those parameters, if you will. So the idea behind creating the specific weekly requirements of 7 weeks in the fall, 7 weeks in the winter. Ideally, I say 14 weeks over the summer. Is because we want to avoid a scenario where students are completing 40 hours on any given week. There are learning benefits from going in and week out to see the progress of your clients, the progress of your students, whoever you are working with, the progress of a bigger project. So we would like to see you going in on a regular basis, at least once a week for a few hours for 14 weeks. Over the summer, I believe you have 17 weeks to work with. So that still gives you time to take, a 2-week vacation somewhere. Or you don't need to go in on specific days either. Some organizations are very flexible, so you might even be able to go on a Monday and then the following Friday or things like that. But it's not the end of the world if you complete 13 weeks instead of 14 either, because you would still be going in progressively. We want to avoid a scenario where you're doing a bulk of your hours in a short amount of time. It's already condensed. Most of our students are going to be working over 30 weeks. So 14 is already pretty condensed. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And then, Alex, I have another question, I guess, from one of the students who are asking me. So they're asking on the topic of electives, if we know that 3rd and 4th year electives can be applied to APA classes as electives, or do the electives have to be outside of the School of Human Kinetics?
They can do APA for sure. I mean, I think the idea is that student would go elsewhere because you already have optionals to take. Optionals 3,000, 4,000 APA, and electives would be like go somewhere else. But at the same time, our students typically take APA courses and it's perfectly fine, yes.
Cool. All right.
Are there any more questions before Dr. Delisio takes over?
I think we should go ahead and start.
If not, then we'll open the floor.
All right. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, sounds like it. Okay, cool. So thanks everybody. Thanks for attending and taking some time to listen to some work going on in the lab. So I'll share my screen really quick because I got some slides. Make that big. Okay, so everybody can see this. So I'm Dr. Delisio. I'm associate professor in HK, the director of the Exercises Regenerative Medicine Lab. And I'm also cross-appointed to some schools, in the Faculty of Medicine, so molecular medicine, and some programs over at OHRI. So we kind of have this interdisciplinary research program. So what is regenerative medicine? Maybe some of you are familiar with it, but maybe some of you aren't. And so it's kind of this field where we're looking at how to regrow lost tissue. So regular medicine kind of just tries to stop the disease process. And regenerative medicine is not only concerned with stopping the disease process, but also repairing and restoring some of the tissues that's been damaged. And so we combine those ideas with some of the stuff in rehab and exercise science to kind of have this middle area here where we like to call regenerative rehab. And we try to understand how exercise, diet, and other lifestyle interventions can actually enhance tissue regeneration. And most of the tissues that we're focused on are the immune system as well as skeletal muscle. And the kind of the things that we look at, so with regeneration, you obviously need something that's going to cause damage and disease to the tissues. And the diseases that we're mostly focused on are obesity and cancer. And so if you're interested in volunteering in my lab or doing an honors thesis project, these are some of the projects that you might be able to get involved in. So one of the main ones that we're doing is led by two PhD students, James and Lisa. And this project is looking at the role of exercise and obesity and colorectal cancer risks. So some of you may know that actually in older adults, the risk for colorectal cancer, the incidence of colorectal cancer is actually going down, but it's actually rising in younger adults who are before the age of the general population screening that's recommended for most people. And some people have thought that it's lack of physical activity and increasing rates of obesity amongst younger adults that's kind of leading to this. And so we were trying to understand mechanistically how that's happening. And our hypothesis is that obesity and exercise are having opposite effects inside of our bones. And what happens inside of your bones is that's actually where your blood cells get made. And when you have obesity, that increases the production of these pro-inflammatory cells that can leave the bones and then go to the colon and initiate colorectal cancer. On the other hand, what we think is participation in regular physical activity or exercise can actually reverse this process, where we don't get this overproduction of inflammatory cells that don't enter the colon and reduce colorectal cancer risk. So if you were to work on this project, you would work closely with James and Lisa. You would get experience doing exercise training in obesity models in animals. You'd also get experience doing some molecular and cell biology related to immune cells and inflammatory cells, as well as work in the colon looking at inflammation and colon cancer. Another project you could get involved in is looking at the long-term late effects of cancer and therapy in models, particularly relevant to childhood or juvenile cancer survivors. And so luckily, most kids who get cancer are actually going to survive out to adulthood. The problem with that, though, is that the treatments and the cancer itself can have negative long-term effects on their skeletal muscles. And that means that these kids who survive often do not participate as much in physical activity as regular healthy kids who've never had cancer. And they also have higher rates of obesity. And so what we're trying to do in the lab is understand what are the cellular sources of these damage to skeletal muscle following cancer plus therapy. So we've got these kind of cool models where we can give mice cancer in the legs, and then we can actually treat that cancer and get rid of it. And then we can do some studies where we can isolate different cell populations from the muscles, look at what genes are expressed in those populations and do some work on those populations in vitro. And we can also do some exercise interventions where we actually like put mice on a reel, or we can do resistance training by adding weights to the wheel to see how exercise can kind of reverse some of these negative effects. If you're interested in coding or like bioinformatics or artificial intelligence, we also have applications where we can take some of these data. We generate very large data sets from these models, and then we can actually make cool graphs like this that look like balls of yarn basically, but we can understand how the different cells and muscles are talking to each other and how the cancer or the exercise affects their ability to communicate. So these projects are led by Nico Koyao, who's a PhD student, soon to be postdoc in my lab. Then the last kind of main project in the lab is actually a human trial that we're running. This is being run by a postdoc in my lab, Kaylee Beaudry. What we're trying to do here is to try to understand if consuming whole eggs or egg whites affects muscle regeneration. And we're looking at that in people who are lean, young adults, males and females who are lean, or young adults who have obesity. You can either volunteer to help Kaylee run the project, or we're also looking for volunteers to actually be participants. And so what you would need to do is basically you would get free eggs for 2.5 to 3 weeks. And in this economy, eggs are like $5 an egg, basically. So that's kind of a good deal. So you get a bunch of eggs, you got to eat the eggs, you come into the lab. We will take skeletal muscle biopsies and blood draws to do our analyses and also do some exercise tests. And then we'll look at the response pre and post exercise. We're looking at stem cells in the muscle to see how they're responding, if there's a difference between lean adults and adults with obesity. And we're also looking to see whether the whole eggs or the egg whites are having an impact on the response to exercise in those stem cell populations. We think that the yolks are having an important role in improving muscle repair and regeneration following exercise. And we think that there's some special unique properties or unique micronutrients in the yolks that are kind of enhancing the response. So we're excited to figure that out. If you're interested in participating either on Kaylee's team to help understand some of these processes that are happening in your muscle after exercise, or if you're interested in participating as a participant, then you can reach out to Kaylee. Her email's below. If you do volunteer in the lab, then you'll get exposure to a lot of different techniques that are kind of unique within HK. We have like human exercise facilities. This is a really nice spot over in Lee's in the basement where we have lots of access to different types of exercise equipment, whether that be cardio or resistance training equipment. We also have a metabolic kitchen in the space where we can actually prepare eggs and other meals for our participants. We also have DEXAs and some other like really cutting edge equipment that we can do some nice whole body human physiology stuff. And then all of our wet lab, like our cell and molecular biology work, we do over at Roger Gandon Hall, kind of in between CHIO and the general. This is just a couple pictures of our wet lab here where we have access to obviously a whole bunch of different wet lab equipment. We also have these facilities here where we can actually grow cells. So what we do is we take the cells out of muscles of either our human participants or our mice, and we grow them up in dishes, and we can do some experiments on them in vitro. So some unique experiences and opportunities kind of in the wet lab space, if that's kind of what you're interested in more on the science side of things. Lastly, why should you come and work with us? Well, we have a really fun and diverse team of undergrads and grad students and postdocs. I have students from human kinetics, health sciences, biomedical sciences, biopharm, TMM. I have students from pretty much a lot of different programs across Ottawa. We're pretty fast paced and hardworking lab. And so you'll get a lot of opportunities and you'll be well supported by all these, friendly looking people who are in the lab. And I've had lots of students who come and do their honors projects who get to be authors on published papers or present at conferences and different things like that. So I'm always looking for eager students. And if you want to apply to kind of do your honors in the lab, all the instructions are on our website. So if you go to the website down here, you can learn more about kind of the work that we're doing in the lab and also how to apply. And after that, you can shoot me an email. My email is down here if you have questions or if you're interested in applying to work for an honors project. So that's it for the presentation that I have. I'm happy to take any questions now if anybody has them.
Amazing. Very interesting.
Thanks, Alex.
I eat a lot of eggs, but I'm not sure I'm lean enough. But yeah, interesting. Do we have any questions? I do have a little question, but it's not, the aim of any of your studies, but when you talked about the kids having cancer therapy, and you said that like if it was obvious that they were less inclined to do physical activity after cancer therapy. Do you know why? Is that the fact? Is that
Yeah. So their participation in physical activity is significantly lower than age-matched kids who've never had cancer. Part of the reason, there's lots of factors that go into that, but part of the reason is their muscles. 80% of childhood cancer survivors have, for lack of a better term, really messed up muscles. So instead of being nice and supple and strong, like most people's muscles are, they kind of get hard. This process called fibrosis, which basically is they turn to almost like a solid, like a wood, basically, as opposed to what you're experienced. They have less capacity, like endurance capacity, and they're also smaller and weaker. They don't develop quite as well. And so they have imbalances, you know, from the local treatments, like the side that was treated versus untreated. So yeah, there's some different reasons, but we're showing some improvements in our mouse models with exercise. And so hopefully to apply those to human studies too.
We have one question in the comments here from Kayla. Is there any prerequisite to be a volunteer in your lab?
No, there's no prerequisites. I will say though, make sure if you're interested, check the website, because I get a lot of people who apply but don't have the proper like application stuff that I'm usually looking for. So that's just basically a quick resume and a little paragraph on why you want to work in the lab. So nothing too intensive. It helps to have a background, having taken some courses in cell biology or molecular biology, or, you know, more advanced XPhys courses like XPhys 2 or something like that. But by no means is it required. Like, we'll get you up to speed and we'll help you, you know, gain the knowledge that you need to work in the lab, for sure. So.
We have one more from Mohammed here. What nutrient in the eggs do you hypothesize is responsible for the muscle regeneration?
That's a good question. It's totally a secret. I can't really say. So, no, just kidding. There's lots of options that we think might be in there. There's vitamin D is one that we would have like as our prime suspect, basically. There's also several different fats in there. So fats like in the egg whites, you don't really get those, but in the yolks, they're important. And when you think about what our muscles are doing, at least at the stem cell level after exercise, the first step is the stem cells basically wake up and they increase in number. So if you're making more cells, you need fats to make more membranes, right? And if you just have the whites, then you don't have the fats to make the membranes. You have to get them from somewhere. So there's also some evidence that the cells are responsive to vitamin D. So those are some of the factors that we're considering might, if we see a difference, and those are some things that we'll follow up on to see if that's what's having an effect. But what we think it's important, because often, you know, people with obesity are like told to avoid whole eggs, right? Because of the extra calories in the yolk. But we think that might be a bit counterintuitive if you're trying to maintain muscle mass or you know, maintain appropriate adaptations to exercise when you're in a caloric deficit, like you might be if you're trying to lose weight, for example. So yeah, that's kind of an idea of what we have there.
All right, if that's everything, thank you, Dr. Delisio.
No problem, guys. Thanks for the attention.
Thank you.
Okay, see you later.
Next, we're going to be passing it on to Jenson Price, who's a PhD candidate under Jennifer Brunet.
All right, hi folks, give me a second to set up the presentation. All right. Just to confirm, we see the pretty presentation and not my speaker notes, correct? Lovely. All right. So as already mentioned, my name is Jenson Price. I'm a PhD candidate here at the University of Ottawa in the Physical Activity and Health Promotion Lab. And tonight I'm presenting on behalf of my supervisor, Dr. Jennifer Brunet. So the research conducted in our lab primarily focuses on exploring the antecedents, determinants, and outcomes of physical activity for clinical and non-clinical populations. So what that means is that we're interested in what impacts people's physical activity levels, as well as what people's physical activity levels impacts on them and how this plays out for different populations, including the general population and those with chronic or acute health conditions. But tonight I will be focusing more on the work we do with clinical populations. For context, more than 44% of Canadian adults over the age of 20 have a chronic condition, which means nearly half of Canadian adults require ongoing medical attention or experience limitations to their daily activities because of a medical condition that lasts at least a year. And for many of these Canadians, they have at least one of the top 10 common conditions, which range from neurodegenerative conditions like dementia to physiological conditions like osteoarthritis and hypertension. However, the work in our lab that I'm going to highlight tonight focuses on cancer. And that's because 2 in 5 Canadians will be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetime. and that equates to about 200,000 adults being diagnosed a year. However, with improvements in detection and treatment, the average 5-year survival rate is 63%. That being said, cancer and cancer treatments take a toll on the body, with many cancer survivors experiencing some form of acute or chronic side effect, resulting in significant decreases in their physical, psychological, emotional, social, and cognitive functioning, which leads to reduced well-being and reduced quality of life. But there are several methods to combat cancer-related side effects, one of which should be no shock to everyone in this room, that's physical activity. Unsurprisingly, physical activity has positive outcomes for physical functioning, including improved flexibility, strength, endurance, energy among cancer patients and survivors. But it has also been shown to positively impact cancer survivors' ability to improve their relationships, feelings of social support, enhancing their mood, boosting the immune system, reducing risk of comorbidities, enhancing cognitive function, increasing self-efficacy, confidence, competence, just to name a few of the benefits in this population. And because of those benefits, the Physical Activity and Health Promotion Lab is dedicated to promoting physical activity through innovative research. And that's really, really clear for this lab because Dr. Brunet is a Canadian research chair, meaning that she is considered to be an exceptional emerging researcher leading the field of physical activity promotion for cancer prevention and survivorship. So if this is an area of interest for you, Dr. Brunet is a phenomenal researcher to be supervised by. In addition to the innovative research we do, we also provide resources to promote physical activity, health, and well-being, and collaborate with research users, which means that we collaborate with the individuals outside of academia who can benefit from the research we conduct instead of just keeping it to ourselves. And a neat thing about our lab, in my opinion, is the diversity of research that we conduct. But at our core, most of the research we conduct is centered around clinical populations, physical activity psychology, collaborating with research users, promoting behavior change, and understanding the role of psychological concepts like motivation and self-regulation in promoting physical activity. And with that, we're also very focused on developing, implementing, and evaluating physical activity interventions and better understanding how health-related outcomes impact physical activity. And we do this using a variety of methods, which I feel is really great if you want to test out research and you're not entirely sure what you like to do yet. So in our lab, we use participants' words and numbers to understand their experiences, as well as observational and experimental studies, partnerships and collaborations with organizations and research users. And we deliver our programs and our resources using different methods to increase accessibility and acceptability. And I'll be honest, most of my slides up to now have been pretty vague about what we actually do in the lab. So I do want to give you a better idea of some of the research that's ongoing right now to see if it'd be of interest for you for your projects. So the first one I'll start with is the ACCESS trial. The ACCESS trial is geared towards young adults who are between the ages of 18 to 39 who have been diagnosed with cancer. And this is because they experience persistent side effects that impact their quality of life that could be improved with physical activity, but this population is often not active enough to incur those benefits. So to help address this gap in the care, we developed a 12-week behavior change intervention that uses evidence-based behavior change techniques and motivational interviewing to support participants to make changes to their physical activity. The intervention was delivered by 2 physical activity counselors, and each counselor met with participants one-on-one, online, bi-weekly. So from February 2021 to September 2022, we recruited 40 young adult cancer survivors from across Canada to participate in a 2-arm trial to evaluate the intervention. And right now we are in the middle of analyzing data to assess the feasibility and acceptability of the intervention. Because the hope is to take this pilot trial and refine it and deliver it again nationally to even more young adult cancer survivors. Next is a yoga program for adults diagnosed with gynecological cancer. And I'll be honest, this one is near and dear to my heart because it's part of my dissertation. What we know is that cancer treatment takes a toll on gynecological cancer survivors' relationship with their body, and yoga has the potential to repair this relationship. But when I set out to do this project, we didn't just want to create something out of thin air. We wanted to ensure that it met the needs of future participants. So what that means is that this program was co-created by yoga instructors and cancer survivors from across Canada who identified the ideal program structure and the features of the program. And what we ended up with was a co-created program and guidebook for a 12-week program that offers 2 60-minute group-based hatha yoga classes a week. And participants have the option to attend in person or online and have access to several optional features to support their enjoyment in the program. Right now, we're running 2 programs with our community partner, the Ottawa Regional Cancer Foundation, to 20 participants with 4 trained staff, an instructor, 2 assistant instructors, and a research assistant. Those last 3 are undergrads in the HK program right now. And at the end of the program, we'll assess the feasibility, fidelity, acceptability, and benefits of the program to refine it for the next time we run it at the organization. But our lab does do lots of other work outside of intervention and program work. So if you're more interested in mechanisms or outcomes of physical activity, there's a few examples of studies that we've done recently that I'll go over with you. The first is we use observational methods like surveys, interviews, and cognitive assessments to evaluate cancer-related fatigue among young adult cancer survivors to get a better idea of how physical activity may or may not support cognitive health. We also use focus groups to work with end users to evaluate how resources supporting physical activity can be better, including having young adults and those who care about them, like their parents and spouses, evaluate a webinar to educate on social support for physical activity. And we also systematically review other studies. Right now, we're systematically reviewing articles to get a better idea of the benefits of psychosocial interventions for body image among breast cancer survivors. Last but not least, I want to highlight one of the best parts, in my opinion, about being part of a lab. And like Dr. Delisio was mentioning, generally, it's the people and the very cool opportunities. Earlier on, Dr. Cressman was mentioning that research projects can help you with applications for grad school by giving you the opportunity to present at conferences or write a manuscript. But I also want to highlight that there's also very much a personal benefit to doing a research project. I've had the opportunity to present my research in great places like Germany, Italy, and Hawaii. And I've met amazing people and made great relationships that serve me both professionally and personally outside of academia. So research is not easy. A 4th-year project is not easy, but it certainly is worth it for a lot of different reasons. So I tried to give an overview of everything we do in the lab. If any of the keywords stood out to you, sounded interesting, I would really encourage you to reach out to Dr. Jennifer Brunet. You can check out our website, pahealthpromolab.com. It gives an update of what we're doing right now in the lab. And I do also want to put it out there. If you're not ready to reach out to a prof yet, but you'd like a little bit more guidance or to chat a little bit more, my door is always open. You can send me an email, or if you happen to be in Montpetit, my office is on the 4th floor and the door is literally always open for you to stop by. But with that, I'll stop there and see if there's any questions.
Another amazing opportunities for students. Excellent, thank you so much. I think we have a question here from Dr. MacIntosh.
When's your next conference in Hawaii and can I come?
So it's NASPA. We just had it actually in May, but we really love it. So the last one was 5 years before that. So if you're available 5 years from now, it'll probably be in Hawaii again.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Jenson.
Did you say on the undergrad are related to the lab right now too? Did you mention?
I have 3 on my project right now. 2 of them are just volunteering as instructor assistants, and one of them is doing her year off in the lab. So they have the opportunity to, 1, see what it's like to work with a community organization to deliver a physical activity program to a specialized population. And they also get the opportunity to test out quantitative statistics, qualitative analyses, and fidelity analyses, because our projects are often quite mixed methods. So it's an opportunity to really test out different things.
Excellent. Any questions, comments?
If that is everything, we're going to pass it on to Dr. Eric MacIntosh.
Thank you.
Okay, a little bit of fun banter on the undergrad position here. Okay, so pleasure to see everybody online. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the research as a sport management prof at the University of Ottawa I've been working on for the last 2 years now on this, I would say, fairly broad topic of safe sport. Some of you may have heard some of the headlines about maltreatment and abuse in the Canadian sports system. And I will say that of the projects I've done over the course of my career, this is probably the most interesting and timely piece on the subject of toxic culture. So if you're not aware, over the course of basically the last 3 or 4 years, there's been several calls to action in efforts to create a culture of safety for our athletes. Probably don't have to tell you much about Athlete A and the USA gymnastics scandal. That stuff's happening here in Canada, and it's fairly widespread, and it runs quite deep in our system. And so I've spent most of my career looking at culture as a phenomenon that has several antecedents and many consequences, sometimes negative, sometimes positive. My interest with this research is trying to figure out how to transform the sport environment to create all the good that can come from sport and change basically the way we approach sport from different perspectives, from the athlete, coach, administrator perspective in particular. So I'm going to share with you some of the research currently and talk a little bit about the next couple of years to see if there's any interest and fit with that. This is not a simple topic. Culture is very much a complex, very difficult subject matter, I suppose. And oftentimes I think people throw the word culture around like they know what they're talking about. You know, if you listen to media or watch TSN or even hockey for that matter, they discuss this concept of toxicity and culture in the room and this, that, and the other. And the majority of people really don't understand what it is. And this slide kind of presents some of the concepts of where harm can occur in sport. And of course, I'm not going to go through all these. You can just take a look at some of these now. But these inform what culture is. From a theoretical perspective, it runs deeper than that. But on a more simple level, it's really how things are done around here. And you can think about the culture of, let's say, the School of Human Kinetics, how things are done around here. And you can think about all the different actors, the professors, the administrative staff, other students, etc., that generate this feelings of welcomeness, or the opposite of that, or ones that cause harm. And so my research kind of looks at why this happens. What's the fundamental root of the problem? Most often it lies in this concept of what we terminate as values and beliefs. So how do we transform the sport environment towards a safe sport reality for our athletes? This, in fact, is the million-dollar question that's being discussed at the federal level and the provincial level and the grassroots infrastructure level. And there's a lot of ambiguity that exists between all those levels, which makes it even more complex and difficult, but at the same time, really, really important to do good research in this space. Essentially, what we're finding in our data is that most of the harm occurs with the people closest to them, athlete to athlete, coach to athlete, support staff to athlete, all the way through to the systematic level that tries to govern our sports sector. And we're starting to realize that what we term as values and beliefs actually manifest in very much unsafe conditions at times. So my research looks at the unsafe aspects and the safe aspects. And I've started this with the very basic understanding that, or argument rather, that we should begin with the athlete perspective. They're the central stakeholder in sport, prime benefactor, prime producer of sport. If we ignore their voice, we're going to get the message wrong. So over the course of the last 2 years, I've been working within the high performance sports sector with a variety of athletes in the Olympic, Commonwealth, single sport championship, professional sport sectors to try to understand, when is it that they feel unsafe? What's the consequence of that? And how do we move from unsafe to safe sport? So these are some results that we found so far. Coach behavior is an obvious cue when people feel unsafe. You know, they're the gatekeeper of resources. They have exclusionary behavior at times, etc. There's a lack of resources in the Canadian sports system, especially for the NSOs, national sport organizations, that do not have the same sponsorship money coming in, broadcast rights that they share, etc. And that creates a capacity problem in management. An inattentive sport system that lacks accountability, that lacks sanctioning power for egregious behavior, that has a political will that's rather paltry to make change happen. And the list can go on. Obviously, we don't have time to go through this, but I want to give you a sample of what this data is starting to tell the story of how is it that we're going to shift our society to look at sport in a different light. Of course, the Canadian Association of Coaches, the Center for Ethics in Sport, there's a number of different organizations that try to train and coach and teach and develop our high performance system. Very little of this happens at the grassroots sector where most of sport happens. And so you can get a sense here where athletes feel safe, you know, when things are followed through on with regulations, when people have their best interest at mind, etc. And there's a number of cues that we can build off of to try to understand how to create an actual culture where safe sport can be realized. So what I've been trying to come to grips with is, how can we get the main actors in our sports system to stop talking in silos and start realizing that they're in this together? You think it's a simple thing, but it's absolutely not. The majority of our leadership in sport right now is so focused on performance excellence and winning at all costs, which is a basic assumption of high performance sport, that they're failing in their efforts to solve a long-standing issue that has run rampant in our sports system for as long as I've been alive. Things like hazing, initiation, all kinds of different maltreatment, abuse, and harm that occurs. And again, I say this with a grain of salt. If you're interested in this space, it's not going anywhere. There is so much work to be done in this area, even with just one of these stakeholder groups. This touches on Canadian sport policy. It touches on ethical codes, certifications, and how we arrive at credibility, who should say what and do what when, all these other factors that are involved in understanding human behavior. And when it comes down to it, what we're really starting to realize is that if any change will end up happening in our larger sport infrastructure, it has to begin really at the grassroots level. You know, my research has focused primarily on the high performance sector to date. And, you know, over the course of the next couple of years, I'm still working with athletes, coaches, and administrators, trying to understand how can we enact behavior change in a real way that has actual consequences on how people feel and how they perform on the field as well. And so I have a tremendous amount of interest in this space. But it also has to happen at the grassroots level of our sport. And at the moment right now, there's a lot of ambiguity on who is responsible for what, who reports to whom, how do we treat harm, how do we deal with trauma, and the list continues to grow as this research hopefully points new ways or perhaps even new approaches to complement some of the existing mechanisms that are trying to inculcate safe sport across our country. So I've just recently completed interviews with high performance coaches and administrators before Christmas. The same exercise in data analysis will be followed for that group. And inevitably, this will culminate in working with the National Sport Organization over the course of a year, maybe 2 years, to really try to tease out how things are versus how things should be. So if you're interested in this space, like I said, there's quite a bit of good research that needs to happen on a very important file that's sure to shake our sports system for years to come. I think, anyways, this is my prediction. So I'm certainly happy to answer any questions if there's any interest in this. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. MacIntosh. It's really wide, right? It's massive, your research. It's like your lens is very wide. And I was wondering, yes, you're interested in sport, in high performance sport?
Yeah, I started with high performance sport. It's a natural extension of some of the work I've done with Commonwealth Games Federation and the Youth Olympic Games. And but, you know, I kind of shifted a little bit because I realized that, well, I mean, I kind of saw the writing on the wall that this was coming, that you know, that the government has to respond to what's happening, because it's just been too long, far too long, that these issues have been prevalent in our society. And I shouldn't say that it's just sport. I mean, this obviously happens in other sectors too, but you know, my work is in sport, so that's why I'm focusing there.
Any particular sport? Because the interview did.
Yeah, for sure. So so 29 high performance athletes. The interviews were 35 minutes roughly over Zoom. Rugby, gymnastics, hockey, lacrosse, soccer, basketball, some of the winter sledding sports. Yeah, so it parasport as well, I should say. Yeah.
Wow. It's a lot of sports. So I was you were talking about grassroots sport, and I think about for instance, my daughter plays competitive volleyball now. She's in different leagues and she's really into that. She's young, but I can see how it's evolving towards more and more competitive, more and more, and she really wants to continue. And yeah, and I always have this worry in how this would go if one day she reaches these levels.
Yeah, I mean, most of the people I spoke with, and again, I can't say who, but, you know, so I can tell you that some of them were, you know, podium people. I'll just leave it at that. A lot of the harm occurs in the grassroots club level sectors. And one of the reasons is because there's a limitation on sanctioning and jurisdictional, legal, civil, and criminal issues at stake. And so the way our system works now at the national level is these national sport organizations do not necessarily have jurisdiction in the provincial territorial level. Yet they're the ones that are being charged with delivering a fairly new policy that the federal government has been involved in creating, you know, Sport Canada and the like. So it's also a funding issue. It's also a policy issue, but my research is more interested in the behavioral components that allow people to perpetuate harm. You know, and we don't have to look too far. I mean, Hockey Canada is kind of the most poignant case study to sort of understand when the organization is put first before the person, this is where all the problems really start to happen. And what we're seeing now in the media is these things are starting to be exposed on a national level, and it's creating havoc, really, and it should, in terms of making change happen. Yeah.
Let's hope it will, this exposure they're having now, let's hope it will give example for all the other organizations.
I mean, I
resisted quite long, right? Hockey Canada, they resisted quite long with their board, and they struggled to respond to all the media pressure and everything. But now
they responded as soon as their sponsors started pulling their money out. Yeah. You can follow the capitalism in a lot of the responses, and it starts to make a bit more sense.
So I don't know if we have any more questions. The next presentation is the one that got canceled.
Okay.
Right? So either you can talk more with Dr. MacIntosh.
Well, I can say a bit more. I know I caught a bit of Michael's and Jenson's presentation. You know, the sport management stream has a thesis stream. And I don't know, I can't speak for all my colleagues, but, you know, typically at any one time, they're working on event level research in sport. You know, and there's a lab. I don't have pictures to show you, but I echo what Jenson said earlier. I would say that's probably true of most of the labs, if you want to call it that, or research streams in our program. There's definitely a social component, which is very valuable, I would say. And in sport management, you know, as a growing field, there's lots of opportunities that get you involved with working with national sport, provincial sport, local sport. We've got very strong connections in the industry, especially in Ottawa, in the Ottawa area. So if there's an appetite for that, reach out. I think Michael dropped my email. Feel free to, you know, ask a question that way, or if you'd like to now, since there's a cancellation in the program.
Yeah, it's really nice to see a completely different field, right? From the previous ones that were also different, but they were both interested in physical activity and cancer. They had their labs. And here, like, if you try to visualize yourself as a student, what would it look like to work with you? It would be maybe more linked to qualitative analysis, maybe interviewing analysis of.
Yeah, this is actually a bit of a departure from my norm, to be honest with you. This is a purely qualitative study. I tend to favor the side of quantitative most of my career, a little bit of mixed method. And so this one's actually challenging me a little bit, especially the third phase, which is participatory action research, where we would work with an organization over a year to year and a half. So that's actually the next phase of the study that is yet to be finalized. We're still trying to find a partnering organization to work with, but that might be an opportunity if you're looking to do a master's. That's a fairly long commitment for research. You know, like the nature of the research that I do, at least a year and a half long journey following the story, so to speak. But this particular subject is qualitative work. Yeah.
Very interesting. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. I think we can. Dr. Clouthier is here. Isn't Dr. Clouthier the next one? On the
yes.
schedule? Good. I think we could just continue, even if it's a little earlier.
All right. Yeah, I think we should go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Dr. Clouthier.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the research that I do in my lab. So it's mainly focused on the biomechanics of knee function and dysfunction, which I'll explain a bit. So we're in the area of biomechanics, so we're studying human motion and the forces and moments acting on the body and inside the body, so inside joints, what the muscles are doing, things like this. So we're really trying to quantify how people move and yeah, what's happening to cause them to do these movements. And the thing we're interested in looking at with that is, for one, I'm mostly focused on the knee, although I have done some work on some other joints as well. So we're looking at how the joint functions. So just better understanding how it works and how different anatomical parameters affect how it works, because things like the shape of the joint or where ligaments are attached or the properties of ligaments or what sort of muscle control strategies you're using or all these kinds of different things all influence how the joint works. And they're all vary quite a bit from person to person. So it's important to understand how those influence how the joint works, just to get a better understanding of that. So yeah, and one of the reasons why is because it's related to dysfunction when the joint isn't working how it should. So we want to understand how these different anatomical parameters and things can increase someone's risk of getting a musculoskeletal disorder or injury. So some of the things I look at are things like patellar instability, where the kneecap is unstable or maybe even dislocates in some people, or things like knee osteoarthritis, where the cartilage is breaking down. So we want to know, if certain things like a certain shape of knee or certain way of walking or something like that can put people at risk for getting these issues with their joints, so that we can try and identify those people, maybe do something to prevent it, or just understand why it's happening a bit more. And then the other thing we can hopefully do with that information is try to improve the treatment of those musculoskeletal disorders and prevention. So if we can identify early that somebody's going to be at risk of this, maybe we can intervene, do something to stop it from happening. Or if it's already happened and they're having some kind of issue, how can we find the best treatment? So if we can understand how certain these different factors can influence if a treatment is effective or not, then we can try and find the right treatment for each patient, because there's lots of different options for these different things. There's orthopedic surgeries, there's physiotherapy, there's things like bracing. So different things you can do to try and treat them. And a lot of them will work really well for some people and not at all for other people. So we want to know why that's happening and how we can identify what treatment is going to work the best for a specific person, so that they can get the right treatment sooner, and also figure out how to improve those treatment options as well. So some of the tools that we use to look at this, big one is optical motion capture, where we're putting the little reflective balls all over somebody and then having them do different movements, and we can record their movement and quantify it using that. So then we can look at how different people move, people with a musculoskeletal injury versus people who don't have that injury, things like before and after surgery, to try and understand a bit more about what's happening with these different things. And we also have, now we're starting to get into a bit more of markerless motion capture. So with the optical marker-based motion capture, we have to spend a lot of time putting the little markers all over a person. But now we have a markerless system too, where the person can just be wearing anything. They don't need any markers or anything like that. And we just have these 8 video cameras that we take videos with. And then this software uses artificial intelligence to identify where their joints are and track the 3D motion of that person without having to put on those little markers. So you can see we get this sort of skeleton out and can quantify their movement in 3D. And this is just another video showing the miraculous motion capture there for somebody walking. And then there's kind of new things coming out as well. So there's this new software called OpenCap that was released recently. It's an open source software. So it's similar to the one I was just showing that we have in the lab, except that one you need about 8 cameras and that expensive software to do the tracking. And this one uses just 2 iPhones, and the software is free that you use. And it also tracks 3D motion just from these 2 videos. And it does a bit of modeling as well to try and estimate the muscle forces and ground reaction forces and things like that to go with that movement, which is kind of cool. So this is one thing I'm interested in looking into a bit more that I think could make a good project, is testing this out since it's still fairly new, to try and see how accurate it is for some of these measurements of movement and predictions of forces and things like that. And then after we have this data, we sometimes get into a bit more, I guess, advanced or computational techniques to work with the data. So one thing we've done is musculoskeletal modeling, where we're taking that motion data and then using computational model to try and figure out what's happening inside the knee during that movement. So we can estimate the muscle forces and try and see what kind of loading's happening on the cartilage and things like that. And then in terms of looking at the anatomy and how that changes, we have some methods for quantifying changes in geometry. So we can create these kind of morphable models where we can change the geometry to see how that varies from person to person. And then we can also change it within the model to see how that influences what's happening in the knee. So here we had 2 different shapes of knee, and then we were simulating a surgery to see how is this surgery different for people with different shaped knees. So we can kind of understand how that's the outcomes of the surgery might be for those different shaped knees. And then we also do a bit of artificial intelligence. So mainly trying to use that to automate some of the processes we use to make them faster and easier, less tedious. So for example, we've looked at things like trying to take a 2D X-ray and use AI to predict the 3D shape of the spine or knee or whatever you're interested in just from that 2D shape, so that you don't have to get an expensive MRI and spend lots of time processing that data. You can just have this X-ray and predict the 3D shape. And another example that we looked at was taking this motion capture data and then using artificial intelligence to identify what type of movement's being done and when it started and stopped. So then we can sort of crop out the movements that we want from the data automatically. So then the last thing I'll mention is a study that we're going to be starting soon. So we're working with a surgeon at CHIO and the research group there to look at patellofemoral instability in adolescents. So this is instability of the kneecap. And we're going to get some adolescents with patellofemoral instability and some without to come to the lab so we can measure their movement. And we'll get some MRIs of their knees too, so we can look at how the anatomy is different between these 2 different groups, how their movement is different, try to get a better understanding of why these people are having this instability, and then in the future kind of look at what we can do to make the treatments more effective. So this is another spot where we're starting this soon, so there might be an opportunity to get involved with this study as well as a project. Yeah, so that is basically the overview of my research. So if any of those topics are of interest to you, feel free to get in touch, or if you just have any questions or anything, you can ask now or send me an email later if you think of them later.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Clouthier. I can ask a question. I like thinking about students visualizing themselves in your lab. It sounds like it looks like you work with really advanced technologies and equipment. And I was like, if I was a student, I would be intimidated, I think, by all this, all this technology. And how can the student can contribute to your lab at this undergraduate level?
Yeah, so I think there is a few different ways. So there's ways to be involved actually in the lab, collecting the data, which then they could be working with a grad student or somebody else to help them get familiar with that technology. And it's not really too complicated to use. And then some of the other things, just analyzing some of the data, or looking at results, things like that. There's definitely some parts that are very complicated, but there's also things that aren't too bad to kind of get a taste of what it's like and see how that works.
So lots of learning anyway. Just learn completely new things you would never learn in courses with these technologies. Excellent, thank you. Do we have any questions? Go ahead, Dr. Robbie.
Allison, I don't know. I don't think we really talked about the new Lees building and what that might mean for students. I don't know if you wanted to plug a little bit about the new space and about what that's going to mean for you and your lab.
Yeah, sure. That's a good point. Yeah, so with the new Lees building, we're getting completely new labs. So we're going to have actually 4 labs that are motor control and biomechanics. So we'll have a nice brand new space and hopefully getting some new equipment as well to go with that. So yeah, just more options for motion capture and things like that. And also hoping to be able to do some virtual reality kind of stuff as well. So you can sort of measure how people are moving in virtual reality and have things they can interact with is kind of the long-term idea. So we should have a nice new space and new equipment to work with, which will be really great in the new building.
Very cool.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Professor. Next up, we have Dr. I really hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Marijke Taks. Am I close? I'm not sure, but
Hello. Yeah, am I on already?
Yes, we are. We had one cancellation, so if you are ready, it's fine, or we could maybe find another presentation. But if you're ready, it's.
I wasn't totally ready, but I can at least start with what I have.
So if we could take like 2-3 minutes to break, if that would be easier for you.
That would be helpful if you can give me just like 3
absolutely.
minutes and start at 8. What am I saying? 50 minutes? Yeah, 7:50.
Do you prefer us to go with another presentation?
If that works, if any of the colleagues is ready to go, because I was ready for 8:05, to be honest.
We could ask potentially Dr. Culver and Sydney that are here, or maybe they're not. I'm not sure that.
I don't believe.
There was also Ben.
Are you ready?
I'm good to go if we want to go now.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll come back later.
But you can come in on your time. Thanks. So, Professor Culver, I think you are in teaching right now. So maybe if it suits you to present now, we could go ahead.
Yep, we can go now.
Perfect.
Yeah, I got my camera. Okay, so you're going to share your screen, Sydney? Right, so I'm very excited to present this. Actually, mostly Sydney's going to present it. I think Sydney is in her second year of her master's with thesis. And the project that she's going to be using a concept called design thinking in her PhD. And she's going to show you about this through this presentation, which is not actually for her master's. When she was in her 4th year, I think it was, at Laurentian University, she founded the Laurentian University Women in Sports Group. And so what we're going to see today is a project that we did for what was called a Global Design Challenge. And she used her group at Laurentian University as the group, the design group. And so I will let Sydney proceed, and I'll come back at the end.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Diane, for that. So let me just make sure this works. Everyone's able to see my screen okay, hopefully. So yeah, as Diane mentioned, I am one of her students in her lab, and my thesis work is actually related to student athlete mental health, but I'm using the design thinking process that we'll be talking about today. So what this presentation is really about is just getting people excited about sport and exercise psychology research. And so how I see it is there's typically 2 categories where, you're exploring the psychological factors that affect either athletic performance or, sport participation, or you're seeing how sport participation enables, positive development and societal changes. But one thing that they all share in common is innovation. So, the reason why we do research is advancing theoretical or applied knowledge by challenging the status quo. And, to me, that's what research is all about. That's my favorite thing, is just being able to apply all of your findings and seeing the results of that. And so how I use innovation and how it inspires my research that I do is through the design thinking approach, which is defined as a human-centered approach in which you seek to understand your users' experiences, the problem at hand. You ideate solutions that you can rapidly prototype and test. So, at the end of every research paper, you'll see a practical implications section, which has a ton of really great recommendations, but sometimes they're not always the most feasible or viable option for sport organizations to actually adopt and implement. And so what design thinking does is it really targets what your end users' needs are, and then also considering the technologically feasible and viable options that are realistic in the context being explored. And so just a brief overview of what the design thinking process looks like. There are a ton of models that exist, but in a broader sense, it starts with empathizing with the end users, defining the solution, defining the problem, ideating solutions, creating prototypes, and then testing. And as you can see here, it's this very iterative process as you gain insights. You're constantly going to the previous stage and moving back and forth. So it's very fluid in that sense. And so I wanted to use this case example of the Laurentian University Women in Sport program called Lewis in the Global Design Challenge. And so the problem that this club was facing was that they saw low participation rates of women, university women in the intramural program at school, and they wanted to enhance their experiences in intramurals. And so what we did was we formed a design team. There was Ottawa researchers as well as people from Laurentian, and we formed a team. And we started with just understanding how we interpreted the problem at hand, as well as identifying some of the key stakeholders that would be involved in potentially implementing a solution. And then the next part is about seeing the problem through the perspectives of the end users. And here, in design thinking, you're really encouraged to be as creative and collaborative as possible. And so what we did to collect data was we used sticky notes. And so we put them in women's washrooms, and there were pens there and posters, and it would just be asking really simple questions like, what types of sports do you like playing? What challenges do you face? And things like that. You know, why do you like being active? We also conducted observations. We attended a bunch of activities being offered on campus. We know university students love free things, so we offered a Gatorade to everyone who's willing to fill out our survey. And we really just wanted to gain insights of their experience. And so through that, we learned a lot about you know, the life of a university student, as well as university women's experiences in recreational sports spaces, specifically, as well as some of the barriers that have prevented them from signing up in the past. And so we analyzed the data by using something called empathy mapping that's often used in design thinking. And so what you do is you thematically analyze things and you're highlighting key passages that reflect, you know, what are women saying, doing, thinking, and feeling. And then we synthesize those insights into creations of fictional personas. And so on the right-hand side here, this is an example of a fictional persona that we created. We did 3 different ones, but the purpose of these is to reflect the user's experiences, not necessarily just one person's, but grouping behaviors, motivations, and, you know, common characteristics there. And so moving on to the next phase of ideation. So as you can see on the left-hand side here, we had 3 different personas, and the design team broke out into 3 groups, and they each got to spend a designated amount of time working through each persona's their experience. And so they were instructed to ideate as many solutions as possible, even if they were unrealistic, to create lists. And then we, by the end of our session, which took about an hour and a half, we came together, and through a process of dot voting, we selected which ideas would be the solution that we wanted to move forward in prototyping. And so we got to vote on the ideas. And then after we actually decided to go with 2 for this specific project, but this is an example of a prototype. So one of the barriers we found was women felt that they weren't signing up because they simply just didn't know how to play the sport. And then in fear of embarrassment or injury, they just opted to not play a sport at all. And so what we did was we created the Learn to Play series. It's women instructors teaching women university students the rules and techniques of a sport. And then this is aimed to gain that foundational knowledge and confidence that would hopefully help segue more women into the intramural space once they're more comfortable. And then we also wanted to introduce just more non-traditional sports that are, you know, evolving. Just in case there were sports that being offered didn't really meet their interests. And then another prototype we created was for an app. So another barrier was simply just minimal marketing. And so through this app called the Women in Sports events, this is more of like the creative process behind the brand, but it's a more accessible way for women to find physical activities that are being offered on campus, not necessarily intramurals. We know that the life of a university student can get quite busy. And so for some, the semester-long commitment was too long. So here's a way that, you know, a one-time event is happening. You could book your spot, you could bring a friend, you know, as well as filter your interests. And if you did need any type of modifications or accommodations needed, it would be in your profile. So this would be something that's integrated throughout the whole university. Everyone can, each different department could put what events they have running in this app, was our idea behind this. So for the purpose of the project, for the design challenge, we only had to present ideas. So we haven't actually gone forward in scaling the idea and testing it, hopefully in the works soon. But yeah, that was kind of just a case study on how design thinking was employed. I don't know, Diane, did you want to go over the benefits that we found throughout using it in some of our research, or?
Sure, thanks. So obviously you can see there's a very collaborative, a type of really participatory action research. And so that you know that the impact is very much tied to the needs of the users, because the end users are involved in it. And also you can have an immediate impact because it's a quick way to address a problem. The visuals elicit emotional responses, like those stickies that you saw. There were hundreds of them, and I didn't get to read them all, but it was very well inspiring to read some of them. And I think we saw that it was actually giving them power, the women, to ask for what they needed for. So that was entered into the Global Design Challenge, and actually Sydney's project was runner-up. And so we're very fortunate now. We have 6 sessions with experts from University College Cork in Ireland, where the Global Design Challenge was based, with an incubator who is helping us figure out how to really move this onto a business model that hopefully eventually will be able to be used across Canada and different universities. So yeah, I really think that Sydney's doing some very interesting work, and we learn a lot from doing this, plus in our incubation sessions, which will help us going forward in our future research. Anybody have any questions?
I have a question. And thank you for the presentation. I think it's quite common that we have we women being less participating less at many levels, but it sounds a bit surprising at the university level. And I was wondering if it compares to other universities, similar size universities, or it's something more unique maybe to this university, this region, or do you even know if there's
Sydney, do you have any ideas? Sydney, I think you were part of a Ontario group, weren't you? Ontario University group for women in sport.
Yeah, so I think, to be honest, I don't think that this problem is uncommon. The Canadian Women in Sport group do a ton of research on girls and women's participation, and I think trends are saying that girls are dropping out of sport much earlier than boys, and by late adolescence, for the most part, girls have dropped out of sport. And so I think that the purpose of this intramurals program was to help the women that are in high school who are super active, just because they don't move on to a varsity level, they just stop completely. And so it's been really interesting seeing girls drop out at that age, and instead, like, we could be targeting them to become remobilized in a way. So yeah, it would definitely be interesting to see other university leagues, but I do believe it is a nationwide problem for sure.
Well, it will be interesting to see the impact of your programs and what you are recommending, for sure. It's nice when we can have research with such impacts, visible impacts. So hopefully continues.
All right, well, thank you so much. It's been really nice to have such a wide variety of projects presented tonight. I think it's giving, obviously this is only a small window of the research that students can take a part of. It's just showing how many different options we have within our program to choose from. All right, so I think we can pass it on to Dr. Taks.
Yes, thank you very much. Very excited to be with you tonight. So I'm going to share my screen. That's probably the easiest. I've seen that most of my colleagues have done that. So, so if all is good, I think this should, can you all see my screen? Yeah, all good. All right. So my area of research is really in sport events and their impact on society. So I have other colleagues that also do event research, but they would look at how events are organized. So from the governance perspective, that would be my colleague Milena Parent. And then my colleague Benoit Séguin, he would look more at the sponsorship and the marketing of sport events. You just heard our colleague Eric MacIntosh speak. One of the areas he does is look at the athletes that participate in events and what it does for them and how it affects them. And I would say my research looks at events, but how it impacts society and communities and individuals in society. So I look at the impact on society. And a couple of years ago, Wheelchair Basketball Canada, our national sport governing body for wheelchair basketball, approached me to inform me they were going to bid to host the 2026 World Championships wheelchair basketball. And for that bid, they were looking for a research partner. And so at that time, we had no concrete idea. We just said, you know what, you can put us down as your research partner. And if you're successful, then we will start working and see what we can do. And in fact, they were successful in the fall of 2020, in the midst of the Corona era. They were informed that they were the winners of the bid. And sure enough, after that, we continued, to connect and create a partnership. And this is all with the intent to use the event to create outcomes for society. That will be our contribution. So in other words, the title of the project, leveraging the 2026 World Wheelchair Basketball Championships to increase awareness and participation. And so what we will do is, we call this event leveraging. And event leveraging means that you're going to strategically plan to generate desired outcomes. What would you like to get out of this event? And once you know that, you've defined that, you start to put a plan into place to generate those outcomes. That's what event leveraging is. And in the context of parasport, because if we deal with wheelchair basketball, we are in the domain of parasport, which means sport for persons with a disability. One desired outcome is to create awareness for these sports and also perhaps to stimulate participation in these sports. So that is why the event like this World Championship is really a very, very good context to continue to do my research in. So I'm really excited. And so we created this partnership. We've already done several smaller projects to really build a partnership. It's not easy. That takes time and trust to do that. But we already had a couple of projects, and so we are well positioned to continue develop this idea. So the aims is to develop and implement this leveraging plan 3 years in advance of the event. So we're really going to work this proactively. Okay, so the purpose of this project is through a collaborative process. So we work together with wheelchair basketball. We're not just going to go and tell them what they need to do. That's not what we do. We work together. We co-create knowledge. They have knowledge that we don't have, and we have knowledge that they may not have, and it's by bringing that knowledge together that we can do something new. We are not here the all know people, not at all. They know much more about certain aspects than we do. So it's really through this partnership that we want to move forward to help them increase awareness for and participation in wheelchair basketball through this event. So we have, in fact, 3 objectives, and I'm going to present all 3 of them. The first one is what we call development support. And this is assisting them with thinking, what do they mean about awareness? And what do they mean about increased participation? So awareness, do you want just everybody to know that we have this event? Or do you want them to know more about wheelchair basketball? So how do you understand awareness? How do you define awareness? So we need to know what they think about that, and if everybody's on the same page, or maybe different people identify that differently, and we need to go different avenues if we want to create awareness. Because creating awareness about the event takes place, or creating awareness about parasport event in general, those are 2 different things, and we'll need 2 different approaches. And then participation, what do they mean by participation? Do they want to increase participation in wheelchair basketball for people with disabilities? Or do they want to increase participation with able-bodied people that join people with disabilities in participating? So how do they define participation? What do they envision? Do they have certain target groups? So we need to know what they want, and then we can start planning. So once we know what they want, we can start with the implementation of a strategic plan of selected leveraging initiatives. So we already know that wheelchair basketball wants to do one event festival in the different provinces leading up in the 3 years to the event. So we know they're going to have these provincial events, but they also, because the event is in Ottawa, want to do a leveraging initiatives around the local school program. So go into the schools and create something to work with the local schools to create awareness and increase participation. So that is implementation. And then finally, evaluation. Did what we do help to increase awareness or increase participation? That's the evaluation. Now, this is a lot of information, a lot of objectives of a large project. But what I'm looking for specifically when I'm talking to you is I am really looking for help from undergraduate students to help me with the implementation phase around the local school program. That means that you would help develop leveraging initiatives with the whole research team, but that you would then go underground and in form of a kind of action research approach, work with the people, observe, help them implement these initiatives, and then potentially also evaluate. My next slide is a bit more complex because it really shows the whole project in one slide, but I'm going to try to pick out what may be relevant to you. Do you see my cursor here? Do you see my cursor? Okay, so as you can see, the whole project works on the national level, the provincial level, and the local level. At the national level, it's all our work that we do with Wheelchair Basketball Canada. At the provincial level, this will be the work we do with some provincial entities during their event leveraging weeks or their event festivals. And then we work at the local level with the school programs. And that's where I want your attention, because this is where I'm soliciting, potential interest from undergraduate students. So here you see all the things that are going to happen. We're going to have wheelchair basketball week events in the province. but we are also going to have in this area here projected school programs. So we envision we will have a first school program around January 24. So the timing is perfect for undergraduate students. You start working with us in the fall, in September. We prepare everything. You can do it on the field when things are going on in January, and then help us wrap things out in the end of March when we plan to report back to wheelchair basketball what the experiences were, what worked, what didn't work, etc. The first year when we do this is just a benchmark year. We're going to observe what they do, how they do it, and then discuss with them how they feel things could go better, change, etc. We learn from that first year, and then we repeat this the year after and the year after. So we build on what we learned to then come up to the event itself. So this is in big lines what the project is about. I hope I gave you enough information what I'm looking for. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to go through all the details, but it gives you a picture what it could look like. And of course, anybody who would be interested will be part of a larger team, and this team will take on other components of this larger project. So voila, that's my contribution, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Taks. Do we have any questions before I go with my question?
I'll just go ahead and say that was one of the most beautiful graphs I've ever seen. It was so well detailed. That's quite a plan you have set out.
I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, well, I was curious to know more about the sport itself, wheelchair basketball, and you're talking about schools. So there is wheelchair basketball in schools, at school level, yeah.
Yes. So the way, I mean, I'm still learning about this, right? I'm really at the beginning. I'm learning myself. But what happens is that local clubs, wheelchair basketball clubs who have the equipment, are able to bring the equipment to a school and let the children try out wheelchair basketball, whether they are able or disabled, so they can experience the sport.
I see. And so the players are not necessarily disabled.
In school, it would be the regular school kids. It's like if Badminton Canada would do a school program and bring badminton to the children in the schools, here they would bring wheelchair basketball. It's of course an exciting new sport that they may have never tried, and now they have the opportunity to try. And one of the ideas behind it, but I don't want to run ahead of time, is that they may want to think about more competitions where you have teams of abled and disabled players in one team and the other team, because if we start doing this, we create more opportunities for people with disabilities to participate in sport.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's interesting approach, right? To promote the sport first, having more athletes, more leagues, more games, more people, and yeah, it would help those who are disabled and can't play in larger leagues.
I think Diane has a question.
Yeah, actually his comment. So actually, because we also do research in parasport, more from the coaching development side, but the way it works in wheelchair basketball is that each classification of disability carries with it a number of points. And, if you have no disability, then you have a lot of points. So every team, like even when they're playing at higher levels, not just in school, you just have to have it below a certain number of points. if you understand what I mean. So it's quite normal to have able-bodied people playing on a team with disabled.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And I mean, you can even think further down the road. And again, this is outside the box, but you could think of family tournaments. So families who have, you know, a kid with a disability, and then you could organize a family tournament, for example, or something like that to just generate awareness opportunities. And an event like that can attract the attention to at least try it, and then maybe go from there. And I'm very excited because I've done a lot of leveraging work for non-para sports. The problem with non-para sports is that it's more difficult to grow these sports because sometimes they are already at capacity. But I think in the case of wheelchair basketball or para sports in general, there is an opportunity for growth. So I really see I see an opportunity here to grow the sport. Yes.
Wow. Very interesting.
Any more questions? If not, thank you very much. I feel like I learned so much from that presentation.
Okay, my pleasure. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And I'm sorry I can go to FNS tonight.
No problem.
Stay warm.
And yes, it's very cold apparently.
Isabella, yes, I can release a sheet with everyone's contact and email, as well as what they research. And the recording for this will come out in the following week. I'll cut it up into the different presentations, and it'll be listed for everyone to watch the ones that they're interested in. So if there was anything you missed during the presentation, you'll be able to go back and double check that. All right, so finally, we are finishing with Benjamin presenting under Dr. Blaine Hoshizaki.
All right. Hi, everyone. Any issues with seeing the screen so far? Are we good?
It says you started screen sharing, but I don't. Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Got it. Perfect. Okay. Awesome. Are you just seeing the slide, or are you seeing like my taskbar below as well?
Just the slide. Yeah, just the slide.
Amazing. Okay, cool. All right. So good evening, everyone. So my name is Ben. I'm sure some of you have either had me as a TA or know me from hockey or something of sorts. I'm a recent Master of Science in HK graduate from Dr. Hoshizaki's lab. So our lab is located at Lee's, A block, room 106. So we're known as the Neurotrauma Impact Science Lab, or the NISL. And tonight I'm going to talk about brain trauma in sports. So just to start, I know right now it's very common for us to be talking about concussion, and much of the language that we use when we talk about brain trauma in sports is based around concussion. Concussions obviously can be sports related and non-sports related injuries, but in the NISL, we don't really like to use concussion based language. The reason for this is because concussion is based on symptom presentation, and this is affected by many factors. So essentially we can have two people that sustain the exact same head impact event. So for example, an elbow to the front of the head at 3 meters per second, and one person's going to present with symptoms, the other does not present with symptoms. So as a result, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find a more objective way to measure brain trauma. So brain trauma is measured as basically a sum of the exposure and severity. So exposure, this being the frequency of head impact events. So this can take place in many sports. So in soccer, headers or shoulders to the head. Football, we're talking about linemen that are making huge hits, or we're talking about receivers that are getting blown up. In hockey, we can talk about simple open ice body checks. We can talk about slips and falls and heads hitting the ice, or even pucks to the head. And so in our lab, we measure brain trauma through a 3-step method. And this involves video analysis, prescribed head impact conditions, and finite element modeling. So the way that we perform video analysis is we acquire video footage either through online databases or by filming in person. We then use Canovia, which is a free video analysis software, to calculate the velocity by using a perspective grid. So this is what we're seeing right here on the ice, is that perspective grid. The markings on the ice are the field of play are used to calibrate this grid. So you're seeing that we're using the red line, we're using the blue line, the face-off dots, and this is used to be able to calibrate the distance between between places on the ice. And the parameters of the head impact are then recorded, and this allows us to do our prescribed head impact conditions. So the next slide is going to be just an example of a couple head impacts. So this example is an example of a shoulder to the head, and it's also going to be a head to ice collision. So you see the player in white here is going to make contact to the player in the burgundy uniform. You'll see the white player's shoulder will contact the head, and the player's head will hit the ice. And I'll run that back just one more time. And so I don't want to touch too much on the parameters that involve that we use for our prescribed head impact collisions, but what we'll do is just go over them quickly. So these being the inbound velocity. So inbound velocity, we group into very low, low, moderate, high, and very high levels. We then will use impact mass. So depending on what the head was being hit on, this I'm using examples from under 15 hockey because that's what my research focused on. But it can vary for example, American football, rugby, or soccer. The impact masses will change. So here we see the shoulder, the elbow, head, glove, and punch events. Then we have location on the head. So what we do is we divide the head into 45-degree sections, and then we have the crown right on top of the head. And based on our video analysis, we do try to determine where on the head it was impacted. So that way we can impact our dummy or our crash test dummy to appropriately replicate the exact condition. And then finally, we have the elevation on the head. And this is with respect to the center of gravity. So right here, we have the center of the head. And then above would be 2.54 centimeters above this center of gravity. And below would be 2.54 centimeters or anything below that. And then with respect to the prescribed head impact conditions for under 15 hockey, again, because this is what most of my research focused on, we use two different data collection methods. So first, we use a hybrid 3-head form is what it's called. This is a crash test dummy that's often used either for car safety or even for testing helmets. And what we do is we'll put a helmet on it and we will strike the head. So we strike the head using either our monorail drop rig or a pendulum drop. We also have a couple other pieces of equipment that we will use. So we have a high velocity impactor or a pneumatic linear impactor. These are for higher velocities and higher masses than are seen in under 15 hockey. So as you can see here for the monorail, we'll use this for head to ice events, head to glass events, or head to boards events. And the pendulum drop is going to be used for elbow to head, glove to head, shoulder to head, or punch events. So here's an example of a head to ice event. It's going to be taking place at 5 meters per second. So this is using our monorail drop rig. You can see here that the head form is actually fixed to our monorail, and it's actually dropped onto a block of ice. So right here is a block of ice that has been frozen for 25 hours. And next here, we have an example of a punch to head event. So this was also this one was performed at 3 meters per second, and this is using the pendulum impactor. The glove here is actually weighted using some steel anvils. And what we do is we weight it till we reach our desired mass. Then what we'll do is we'll fix it here to our pendulum, and using an electromagnet, we'll pull it back to our desired distance. And using a high-speed camera, when we drop the actual glove itself, we're able to record what the velocity was right when it strikes the head here. So here's another video. This is Amir, who's one of the PhD students in our lab. He's going to be performing this impact. And so the third phase of our data collection involves finite element modeling and MPS. So the accelerometers in our head form collect kinematic data, which is then put into our finite element model, which is used to determine MPS. So MPS is maximum principal strain. And what this is it's brain tissue deformation. The process to measure MPS actually takes about 4 hours per impact condition. So you can imagine if we're doing data sets of upwards of 20 head impacts, it's quite a while in order to actually collect this, this measure. And so MPS magnitude, again, like I mentioned, it's measured as a percentage of the elongated brain tissue. What we then do with MPS is we'll group it into levels to demonstrate the different severities of brain trauma. So these being very low, low, medium, high, and very high. And so right here, we're using decimals here, but you could also use percentages. And just to kind of go over what some of them represent. So at about 5% strain, these are just a couple small metabolic effects that take place in the brain. You likely will not actually notice anything. Low is where we start seeing those, quote, concussion-like symptoms. So these are often clinically asymptomatic head impacts, but there are some small functional or structural changes that will take place inside the brain tissue. For medium magnitude impacts will permeate the membrane, and they can lead to acute injury in some cases. And there's about 50% chance, again, of our, quote, concussion-like symptoms. For the high level MPS, we have symptomatic injury almost all the time, and we will see structural failure of tissue within the brain. And at very high, this is where we're talking about permanent injury, loss of consciousness. So these are very dangerous head impacts that are taking place, and very rarely will you see anything take place at 35%. For these are like people falling off of horses and landing straight on their heads. And so right here, I just have some sample data. This is collected from my own thesis. And what it is, it's just talking about frequencies of the MPS levels. So in Bantam hockey, we compared a body checking to a modified body checking league. And we can see that most of the events take place at very low magnitudes. Some take place at low, and very infrequently will we see medium, high, or very high magnitude events. And then here again, on that same under 15 hockey comparison, we're looking at the actual specific events themselves. So here we see ice, shoulder, elbow, head, glass, glove, punch, puck, other, and boards events. So the difference between glove and punch events is glove is like when there's a body check and the glove actually hits the head, whereas punch is actually the fights that we get in hockey. Other events include anything. So these could be sticks to the head, knees to the head to the back or torso. That's mostly what we talk about with other events. So these distributions are very common in the Bantam age or under 15 age. And so now for you in your fourth year projects, what are some examples of projects that we do in the lab? The difference between our lab and a lot of different labs is every time you come into the NISL, you're always given your own study. So we will help you find your topic through joining our lab meetings on Monday mornings. And what you'll do is you'll take that study and you'll run with it throughout. So some examples, how do rule changes affect brain trauma in sports? So we compared rugby sevens to rugby union. We compared the World Cup in 1966 to the World Cup in 2018. Under 15 body checking versus under 15 modified contact hockey, the NHL before and after the lockout. Some other examples of studies we do are how representative are helmet test methods of the actual brain trauma sustained in sports. So we look at equestrian, youth ice hockey, the NHL. We also look at football. We even look at elderly populations and possibly designing helmets for them. With respect to future directions, we look to see how can we predict maximum principal strain directly from video. So this is avoiding that 4-hour-long process per head impact. And for future directions, just to touch on this a little bit more, so we're working on an algorithm with Dr. Graham's lab. That's going to allow us to bypass the video analysis, the reconstructions, and the finite element modeling. And this will help us predict maximum principal strain right away. And the implications of this work, we can create much larger data sets, so we have a better understanding of risks associated with brain trauma. We can actually innovate technology that's tailored to the demands of athletes. So we do a lot of work with CCM, and we actually help them innovate with their technology. And then prevention strategies to better mitigate the risks of brain trauma in sports. So how are the rules affecting the brain trauma right now, and what can we do to improve it in the future? And the best part of the lab, of course, always the social. This is myself with our 3 other master students and Dr. Hoshizaki here. Our contact information is right up here above. So if you want to contact myself or Blaine, Blaine is always looking for students and we're always super welcoming. So if you ever want to reach out, don't hesitate. And you can always email myself as well.
Thank you so much. Another surprising and interesting research. We have a question in the chat, and then a few interesting comments. What a good-looking group, as a comment, and very interesting. Okay, so there the question is, why does the process take so long?
Yeah, so with respect to the process taking so long, so each individual head impact that takes place, we do have to run it through a finite element model. So for those of you that aren't too familiar with finite element modeling, it's basically breaking the brain down into hundreds of thousands of small little elements. And so what we have to do is we have to take this accelerometer data and we have to run it through our finite element model. And this involves about 184,000 components of the brain that we use. And it's a very sophisticated series of calculations that's involved. So as a result, running it through our technology or our program, it just will take a long time just due to the sheer number of elements that we have to recreate with the brain.
Thank you. So, oh, more comments. So what an incredible perspective on head contact in hockey. Thank you, Benjamin.
I had another question. I'm not sure if you answered this already, but what is modified contact hockey?
Yeah, so modified contact hockey, what the league that I looked at, it actually allowed almost like it's almost like a pseudo body checking kind of hockey. So what it is the body checking is not allowed to take place in the middle of the ice. So there's no open ice body checking allowed, but shoulder to shoulder head impacts are allowed under, or shoulder to shoulder events, not head impacts. They're allowed under very specific circumstances. So you have to be against the boards and you have to be traveling in the same direction with your stick on the ice if you're a defender that wants to contact an opponent.
Did I read the graph correctly that there were more head contact events in the modified body checking league?
That's correct. Yes, that was a very interesting part of the findings there, is that we did not expect that whatsoever. But there are many events that took place at very low magnitudes in that division.
Okay, interesting. Paul raised his hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I noticed that on that same graph, there seems to be a higher level of high MPS in both AAA and the modified league. Is there any explanation or hypothesis as to why this happens?
With respect to the highs, these are very sporadic events. So what we talk about is how which of these events were preventable. And there comes a certain threshold where really if we're able to get those down to a very low number, so like under 5 impacts for the number of games that we did, we attribute this usually to the fact that rules were probably broken. So for example, with body checking, legal body checks result in pretty much all of the low and very low events. With respect to high, these are events such as slips and falls where players are hitting their heads on the ice, pucks hitting players in the heads, or even just very high magnitude hits to the head. So stuff that is almost not preventable at all.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. I'm not sure how pertinent.
Of course.
You mentioned at the beginning you separating brain trauma from concussion because concussion was linked to symptoms. But then in your MPS levels, you do talk about symptoms, and how do you evaluate them if you don't look at
Yeah, of course. So the reason why I do bring up symptoms again in the MPS levels here is because this is more just referring to the risk of these symptoms persisting. So symptoms can take place as low as like low magnitude events. But the thing is, the risk of symptoms persisting does change based off of the level. So it's very possible that someone can have symptoms for a low magnitude event, but someone else will not have symptoms. And when we talk about medium here, for example, we say 50% chance of symptoms. This is just saying that at these magnitudes, what's happened is we've only observed symptoms to really be to take place or present in 50% of the cases where someone has sustained a medium medium magnitude event. So that's just saying that it is still subjective, so it changes case by case. But when we measure the tissue strain is objective. It's something that we can measure ourselves. With symptoms, we don't know if this person is just an exception to the rule or if they are the rule. So that's kind of why I touched on symptoms slightly.
And there's another question. If you used AI, do you think you could develop trauma profiles for each sport?
That's the goal. So that's kind of like a long-term plan for us. It's very much the direction our lab is heading in. And so right now we have 2 PhD students, Amir and Parissa, who are doing that right now. They're working, we're trying to develop an algorithm that's going to predict. I think right now we're at about 80% that we can predict, but we do want to get that number to 100 if possible. So we are working on that, and we do want to do that for every sport if we can.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your presentation, Ben. Well, you attracted a lot of questions on that one. That was really fascinating. Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming, and those who stayed till the end. I hope you got something useful out of these wonderful presentations from our faculty. For those who are still here, we are going to be meeting at Father and Sons. So if you're, I know the weather is really bad right now. So if you are able to make it, we'll be there. I know Alex and Michael and myself, Kevin, are going to be there for sure, but we'd love to have you, and hope to see you soon. But be safe. It is pretty nasty outside. Alex, if you want to say anything.
Right. I just want to thank everybody that participated and were here. And I know that this is going to be circulated, as you mentioned, Bryce. Yeah, so we will give, and it will be really a good tool for sharing with the students, so they can, we will try to split the sessions, like the first session, second session, and maybe the presentation into maybe 3 videos. And I'm really happy that the presentation were really targeted at students coming into the fourth year research project, because I thought in some cases they would be more general, this is what I do, but not necessarily have space. But everybody was really sharing how they could welcome students on the fourth year project. So I'm really hopeful that we'll have a good next year cohort of fourth year projects. So so thanks everybody, and time for a beer.
Exactly. All right, good night everyone.
So we'll meet there, I guess. Thanks, Diane. Thank you so much for being there.